and forget what everybody else thinks. I think that's one of the gifts of maturing. You stop worrying about what everybody else says you're supposed to be doing, and you start really living more and more from your own inner knowing. So I just encourage people, learn as much as you can about it and just relax into it as it's a process.
Welcome to the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast, where we explore how slowing down helps us lead, live, and grow with greater clarity and intention. I'm Kendra Chapman, your host, and today I sit down with Dr. Toni LaMotta, who, after spending 16 years under a vow of obedience in a convent, discovered something profound that many of us, whether we realize it or not, take vows of obedience to family expectations, corporate culture, perfectionism, or relationships in general, where our voice gets smaller. Toni LaMotta is a highly regarded spiritual coach, master teacher, internationally acclaimed speaker, and expert in transformation. She's an accredited Enneagram professional and master quantum living coach. She has spoken for many companies like IBM, AT&T, and Pennzoil, and has worked with students, executives, and seekers around the world. With a doctorate in religious studies, a Doctor of Divinity, and 3 master's degrees, including 1 in mathematics, Dr. Toni truly embodies both intellect and intuition. But it's her journey from silence to self-trust that makes today's conversations so meaningful. In this episode, Dr. Toni shares how she reclaimed her inner authority and the system that has helped hundreds of others do the same. If you ever felt your voice shrinking in the name of responsibility, approval, or perfection, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Dr. Toni LaMotta is joining us today on the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you for agreeing to join us today.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Do you mind just sharing how you're going slow to go fast these days?
I love it. I start every day with a 7-minute practice. So I will take 2 minutes to teach it because it's powerful. And it's spending 2 minutes getting in touch with your breath and your sensations. Because when you can feel all the sensations in your body and your breath is the only time we're actually living in the present moment. So just coming to grounding and then spending 2 minutes just being aware of that and kind of embodied what you're really feeling. And then when you do that, it opens your heart. It opens a sense of like, what's important to me? What am I feeling today? And so you spend 2 minutes just exploring your heart. And then what happens is your head gets kind of quiet. You know, there may be things still filtering through, but most of the noise stops. So you can just be aware of the visionary process and the profound things that can happen through your head space. It becomes possibility oriented. And then so it's 2 minutes in each center and then 1 minute to recognize that they're all one and they're working together. And that 7-minute practice is the most powerful thing that I think I have ever done. When you really do it, it's worth the hours of meditation. It totally grounds you. And it's the kind of practice that you can do even in shorter spurts during the day when you feel scattered or when you feel too busy. Just stop and say, where am I right now? So it is the way I go slow. Well, I can't say it's the first thing. After my coffee in the morning, I then do my 7-minute practice. And it's a practice I started about maybe almost 2 years ago, and I haven't missed a day. So it's been very, very profound, and I highly recommend it.
That's a great idea. I mean, 7 minutes, anybody can do 7 minutes if you practice.
Exactly. And the early Egyptians say, if you do 7 minutes and really do it, it's worth hours. So most people say you need to meditate for 20 minutes or a half hour. And that's hard for people to find, especially if you're going out to work in the morning and it's hard to get up early. But 7 minutes, we can all find that.
Yes. Yes, I think we can, or we can at least try. Can you talk us through how you went from convent to now spiritual coach?
I was probably 17 years old when I went into the convent. I remember my 80th birthday vividly. While everybody else was out partying, I was saying, "What am I doing?" Anyway, but I spent 16 years and they were very profound years. I don't regret any of it. But it came a time where the church was teaching things that I found challenging and I didn't agree with. And I thought, I can't be a representative of something I don't agree with, which is major why I left. I just add here, going into the convent, I always felt called to priesthood. And, that was not possible. So I think when I really look back on my life that I had less than wonderful models of what married life was supposed to be like. And so I think I was escaping on some level as well. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we can look retroactively and say that's what was happening. So I left because I started seeing some healthy marriages. I worked in a church. I was actually a pastoral associate. And that's an interesting title because men are associate pastors and they couldn't call me that. So they simply called me pastoral associate. But I actually functioned in the second position in a Catholic church for a number of years that we could go into long stories. That was a wonderful time in my life. And I met a number of couples who had all kinds of challenges, but they were real and they were I saw their deep love and I thought, I want that. I'm just going to preface, I never did find that, but I left because I saw it was possible to live a holy life without living under those vows. And so I began kind of a search for what was my life work. And I started working in the computer field. I was good in math. I had a master's degree in math. In the convent, we used to call it sexual sublimation. You just went to school constantly. So I have a lot of degrees and I had a degree in math. So I got a job in AT&T, program analyst. I know more should have been a program analyst than the man in the moon. It was not the right fit for me. However, I moved from there to a company where I trained technical trainers. And from there, I actually started my own business doing training in the subject in the software that I had been working for. So I started a real journey looking for what I was supposed to be doing, and we called it Technical Learning Institutes until I started discovering something like Myers-Briggs. And I became an expert on Myers-Briggs, personality typing. And I literally began speaking at training all these technical conferences all over the world. And it was quite it was quite an interesting experience. So I changed the name of my company to Total Learning Institutes. And I began a lot of the training on my own. I started really delving into some of the spiritual training, the reading, and, I was growing leaps and bounds. And so I don't know how much I can describe in a few minutes, but I went from doing that. I brought the company into bankruptcy because I had no clue how to run a company. I'm a great trainer. I was a great speaker. I could do all that, but running a company was not my forte. And so I left there, became a professional speaker for a while, and just traveled around speaking and went from one thing to another and even one church to another. I was trying to find my ground. I kept going to the Catholic Church for a while, and I think I was a threat to everyone because I had, a doctorate in divinity. I one time offered to I used to sing and play the guitar. I offered to sing at one of the churches, and people got angry because they paid their singers and I didn't ask for money. It
Mm.
was just a comedy of errors. I had one challenge after the other, and I finally decided to do the geographic cure of life, and I moved from New York to California. I mean, talk about, and it was literally a geographic cure. I'm just going to start all over. And when I got out there, I met some people that I had known on the East Coast who introduced me to the Unity Church. And so I got involved in the Unity Church, and I have such a history with churches. I get thrown out of so many churches, it's pretty scary. But I think it's because I just keep looking kind of ahead of my time. And
Mm,
so I left the Unity Church eventually and joined a religious science church, eventually became a minister of religious science. And it was there that I did a lot of the training that I'm actually now teaching. Although I'm still ordained religious science minister, I ran churches for a number of years and eventually retired from that and started saying, I could just do this online and start working with people online. I then met, and this is an interesting segue, during that time, someone introduced me to the Enneagram. And the Enneagram, I saw it as just another type theory. Why do I need it? I know the Myers-Briggs. I was really good at the Myers-Briggs. I was certified. I was known for it. So why do I need the Enneagram? So I ignored it. And many years later, somebody else started saying, I became involved in something called the integral theory. And integral theory is basically another way of looking at adult development, but looking at a way of like holding on to what's good as you move towards the next level. And many of the integral teachers taught the Enneagram. So I was confronted with it again. And when I looked at it this time, I saw that it was far more than a typing theory. It's really an opportunity for helping people grow spiritually. So I started to learn and teach. Eventually, I'm now accredited by the International Enneagram Association. I'm certified in the Enneagram for conscious living. I do my homework and I've learned all of those things along the way. And then I started working with a company that taught you how to market your services. And it was fascinating because they talked about marketing to people's pain.
mhm,
Well, when you study the Enneagram, for those who don't know the Enneagram, the essence of it is that there are 9 basic ego types. And so, how do you describe 9 different pains? I couldn't do it. I kept struggling. And then we did an exercise one day that said, think about waking up in the middle of the night as your client and write out what your pain is. And I went, how am I going to do that? 9 different people. And I said, just go stream of conscious and see what happens. And I began writing out all the pain points that ultimately turned out to be an Enneagram 6. And when I talked to my coach, she said, it's clear you are the coach to Enneagram 6s. And I
mm,
resisted that for a while, but not very long, because an Enneagram 6 is a person who doesn't trust anybody, but least of all their own inner knowing and inner decisions. And then I started looking at all the ways I'm like, why should I teach an Enneagram 6? I lead with an Enneagram 7. I'm not a 6. What do I know about it? And then I looked at everything I have been teaching over the years and said, oh my God, every course I've taught has been about getting in touch with your own knowing. So I put
mm,
them all together. I now have a training. It's a hybrid coaching training program to teach not just Enneagram 6s, but anyone who wants to know how to lead from their own inner knowing. That's a very long answer to your question, but it's my life, my entire
yeah,
life in a nutshell. And it's so exciting to come to a point in my life. You'll see a dragonfly behind me. And the
mhm,
dragonfly is a symbol I use for my business. It doesn't get its true colors until it reaches maturity.
mm,
And I think even in my own life, I suddenly feel like, oh my God, everything I've ever known has come together. And so what I'm teaching is what I've been living all these years. It's so exciting. I've always wanted to feel like, you know, this is who I am. This is what I'm
yeah,
here to offer. And that's happening right now, and it's been, really exciting. So it's the Enneagram that I teach, but it's beyond. I call it Enneagram informed, and I love
Mhm.
learn the Enneagram, but then there's so much more in terms of how do I get in touch with my own inner knowing? And that's really what everything is about, and that every type needs that. Primarily the sixes, but the rest of the type also can deal with that.
I mean, that just hit so many points for me that I wanted to make sure we touched on today in our conversation. So you've weaved that tapestry beautifully already. So I'm wondering so much about finding your purpose, knowing what your purpose is, and how people are leaving their jobs to find their purpose if they're not enjoying what they're doing. I see a lot of that overlapping with your values alignment with your whatever you choose to do for your vocation and your job that earns money. So, do you see a connection with that purpose? Where does that all come together?
Well, step one is learning to listen to the two voices inside your head. And when I say two voices, one of the teachers I studied with is a woman named Sonia Choquette. And look her up. Her work is phenomenal. But she teaches that we all have an inner voice that's a spirit and an inner voice she calls the barking dog. And I love it. And she says to name the two. And so the first thing I teach all of my clients is to name those two and start listening, because the barking dog is loud and it says, you should be doing this. This is what your parents want. This is what makes you money. This is what. So all of that noise, you studied this. You ought to be a lawyer. You just finished your degree. Why are you trying to, all that noise? It's always noise and it's always barking at you. The inner compass, the spirit's voice, is quiet and peaceful. And it doesn't always agree with what you think you should do. So people get the idea that, my inner voice is going to be love and joy and lollipops and roses. Sometimes it says, hey, you better change this, or let's look at this. But it does it in such a loving way and a quiet way that you can hear it. So the first thing to do to know what is your purpose is to start to see if you can discern the two voices.
So, do you see ego as that barking dog? Would you say if you were trying to find that alignment?
Ego is a big piece of it because ego, see, to me, the way we develop our ego is fascinating to me. We all come into this world in perfection. I really believe that every child comes in, every look at a baby, everybody smiles, everybody is always because the baby is perfection. And then something happens. Sometimes it happens pre-birth, sometimes it usually happens in the first 5 years, is what psychologists have told us. We have a rupture that says, I'm losing my connection with the divine. And so we find a behavior that is being supported. For example, the child whose their parents are having a hard time taking care of themselves and the child has to take care of their needs, that becomes their ego strength. Or the child that has to be perfect, never might want to make a mistake, or the child that has to like meet whatever the parents want, or the child who thinks that knowing things is the answer. There are a bunch of ways that people develop that ego. And so it's not all bad. It has a lot of positive qualities. So I don't know that the ego I don't wanna equate the ego with the barking dog, because some of the ego, when you get to know the strengths of your type, are powerful, and we wanna use them, and they've served you over the years. So if you think of them as the barking dog, you're gonna try to silence it, and we don't wanna silence the ego, we just wanna be aware. I love the teaching that says, you don't have to fix anything. You simply become aware and it changes. It's amazing when you start noticing, hey, this isn't working. I see it. Oh, I did that again. That didn't feel very good. And so eventually you simply change. It's really it's powerful because so many people are working on themselves or fixing themselves, and that doesn't do any good. That's a barking dog. Something's wrong.
Okay. Yes. I like the idea of going beyond the Myers-Briggs because I too used it in my early years trying to figure people out when I was a teacher, figuring out the adult landscape and the kid landscape with the teachers and the staff and my colleagues. And so I would go into classrooms supporting kids with special needs as a special ed teacher, and I would see the kids and the teachers that I was both working with butting heads. And so I would have them each take a Myers-Briggs assessment. And I was talking to the teachers to be thinking about presenting material in a different way for this child because they're not listening, they're not hearing that. And so it was interesting. It was fun, but I like the idea of the Enneagram being able to really encourage the growth part of that journey, not just typing and then moving on.
Exactly. I love the Myers-Briggs. I still love it, but it is a psychological type. The Enneagram is not a typing instrument, even though part of what you learn is your type. It really is. It's so profound in terms of looking at, I mean, there's not only your type, you can be looking at your wings or the supportive types. You can look at what they call your arrows of where to go. Where do you go when you're under stress? Where do you go when you're more integrated? And then there are 9 levels of health. How do I get healthier within my type? I mean, it's an entire system of spiritual growth. I want to go back to something else, though, that you mentioned a little earlier. You talked about shadow work. So, because shadow work is a big part of my work, and it's again not trying to fix something, but to find compassion. The way I do shadow work is something called the quantum living process. I didn't create it, I've used it and I use it extensively. But it's a matter of looking at what's triggering me. And so yesterday, for example, my emails stopped working and my website ran out of data space. I mean, talk about a trigger. When you're running an online business, you can't get your emails. So there's a trigger. What we do with that is say, what am I feeling? What are my sensations happening when that trigger is happening? And then when you really do the depth work with it, when else did I feel that when I was a small child? And what it brings you to is some belief that you made up because of some memory that you had. And it usually doesn't look at all like the trigger you're looking at. So it's not like, when did this happen when I was 3? Because the internet didn't exist. But, when was I feeling this? And I'll give you what sounds like a silly example, but this has been profound in my life. I was teaching a class, and every time I taught the class, I was feeling inadequate, like I'm never going to be good enough. And it was crazy. The class loved it. I was getting rave reviews. Why am I feeling this? So I went back and I remembered a time when I brought home a report card in probably second grade. And my dad looked at it and said, it was no less than 98 on everything. And he said, so why wasn't it 100? I mean, dad loved me. I knew that. But as a small child, I created the belief I'll never be good enough, no matter how much work I do. So, in the quantum living process, we actually teach people to change the neural pathways of that memory. You can't change your memory, that's what happened, but you can change what you made it believe. And I can tell you, Kendra, that I never have that feeling anymore. I did a workshop the other day where technology was going amiss and everything that could have gone wrong was going wrong. And I felt perfect in the moment. I didn't feel inadequate. I didn't feel not good enough. And the people were just totally with me, totally, presented. So I know something shifted in me. I'm no longer living with not good enough. never gonna be recognized. It's a powerful practice doing that shadow work. So it's more than knowing your personality. And when you know your Enneagram type, you know some of the shadows that you can then start working with. Mine is avoiding pain. I don't want to look at the negatives. Like Miss Pollyanna, everything's always wonderful. And so lately I've had some challenges. I'm really facing them. And maybe for the first time, it took all these years. So it's exciting. Growth is constant. And that's exciting. And it's not trying to fix something anymore. It's just noticing what's next. Okay, let's unfold and uncover that.
Well, and like you said, you have more than one doctorate, you have multiple master's degrees, and your dragonfly behind you is your, your symbol of you are not going to mature until you've done the work, you've lived the experiences, and then you use what you've learned and apply everything. And then it all does come together, which I love.
It's amazing. And you asked earlier, how can someone know what it is they want? Part of it is every single thing in life is not happening to us, it's happening for us, and it's preparing us. So sometimes we don't quite see, like I'm working with a client right now who's in the midst of lots of struggles with her current job. She's an African American, very powerful woman dealing with the race issues, dealing with the feminist issues. And she said to me, everything's confused. I don't know who I am, what I'm supposed to be. And what I'm seeing is her discovering what each of these pieces are. And yesterday we met and she said to me, I'm beginning to see some strengths I never knew I had. And I said, do you think maybe those strengths could lead you to what your purpose is? And she started to laugh. And it's only because she's doing the work and she's looking at all these other aspects and coming to really trust. She is an Enneagram 6 who doesn't trust her own inner knowing. And she's beginning to say, you know what? I'm beginning to see it. And I'm excited. I don't know where she's going to go. I don't know what will happen. She's still young enough that anything's possible. But I tell everybody nothing is wasted. And one of the processes that I teach in my program is also a journaling process that is not just writing out things, but literally looking at different periods of your life and seeing what decisions did you make and what's still alive. Just because you made a decision at 17 doesn't mean that there's not something still, life still wants to speak to you. And your life will tell you what it wants to become, which is fascinating.
It is. It is fascinating. Just trusting your inner knowing is really the key, but you have to learn how to do that again.
Yeah, and everybody needs to learn more. I mean, I'm constantly learning more about how to do that, and I'm noticing how well I'm doing that right now, much more than I ever did. And so I'm excited about sharing it with other people because, when I teach, I learn all the time.
Yes. Yes. So I'm wondering the pattern of that knowing with the Enneagram, where three of the numbers focused on like heart, head, and body.
Yeah.
Have you seen that that's where the focus is?
Yes and no, because the knowing has to come from the three integrated, which is why I shared that practice. The practice that I talked about, 7-minute practice, helps us put together the pieces that aren't strong. We're all leaning towards like the head type. I'm a head type, can figure it out. And so tries to figure it out and thinks that's the way to go. And they're missing the heart and the body. And so, what you want to do is learn to integrate all three. So, when you're listening from all three centers, the original person who brought the Enneagram to the United States is a man named George Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff is a master spiritual teacher who never taught psychological types. He teaches the meaning of the symbol. And it's pretty profound. I won't go into any of that right now, but he teaches basically we are three centered beings. and we need to integrate them to really be, quote, human. And most of us are in one of those and not the others. Sometimes we have a backup that's okay, but we all have one that's blind. And so when you study, the more you study the Enneagram, you start noticing, oh my glory, I'm real strong in my head and, my body is doing okay, but the heart's been missing all these years. How do I integrate that? And there are practices you can do to integrate that. So to really get to know your purpose, you've got to go outside the center. That's your dominant center.
Knowing that you've been teaching all of these different courses, you've met with lots of different people, large and small groups, and you're working with clients now. Are you seeing in the last couple of years since COVID any pattern changes with human behavior? Or do you feel like it's just an ongoing growth process? Everybody's different.
Well, I think there's more interest. I mean, COVID brought people inward. And so they had to face themselves a lot more. And so I think there has seems to be more and more interest in the spiritual practices and in the spiritual knowing. The rest of the world has become more chaotic, if you will. And so even that is an impetus to like, how do I become more centered? How do I become more whole? And so I don't know if I can speak for the whole of humanity, but I can speak for the people that and I'm privileged. I get to deal with people who want to do this work. So I see a skewed viewpoint. Plus, as I mentioned, I'm a 7. I always see through my little lens. Isn't life good? It's wonderful. So I sometimes miss even what's out there. And yet I think that's the hope that I bring. I mean, my type's gift is to bring joy and possibility. And that's why I love to work with people who are struggling with usually with identity or with trusting, because I can trust for them and with them. I had somebody give me a wonderful compliment the other day. She said, "You don't become another voice of wisdom that we're supposed to listen to. You walk with us so we can hear ourselves." And I thought, I got to put that in my marketing. It is the gift because I don't feel like I have the answer for anyone else. I I really learned with the Enneagram how myopic I am. I thought I had answers, and I see this much, and so I need other people and I need other voices. And I love one of my weaknesses is seeing the negative. So when I work with Enneagram sixes, I'm surrounded by people who see for me what I can't see myself. It's a gift. So my clients are a gift to me as well.
Yeah. It sounds like a perfect alignment there. I think there are a lot of us out there who are just struggling with high achieving pressures, but also trusting our inner voice. Do you have any thoughts around that?
So I think one of the things is to take it in small bites and take it slow. And the first thing I say to people is to take yourselves more lightly. One of the programs that I teach is about spiritual guides and what's coming to me. I trust my own inner voice. What's coming to me is to talk about what they call the joy guides. And everybody needs a joy guide in their life. And the joy guides are the entities, whatever, that bring a little lightness into our life. Because I think and they bring surprises. Whenever I ask my joy guides to bring me a surprise, they always do. I mean, sometimes major things, and sometimes they just bring me a little more laughter during the day. And I suggest to people, start there and don't take it all so seriously. Lifetime, I think I mentioned to you before, I don't always say this on the air, but I just turned 80, and I'm, like, in awe of the fact that I don't look it, number 1, I know. Not and this is my own hair, there's a little bit of gray coming in, but it's amazing. But at the same token, it's like I didn't know till I was in my 70s, really, I can't say I floundered. I went from it looked like I went from thing to thing to thing, and then suddenly when I started doing the journaling work that I did, I saw that it all fit, and there was a theme, and I was always interested in adult development. I studied one of my degrees is from Columbia University, and the course that I loved the most was adult development. And it's like, isn't that interesting? I didn't notice it while I was in it. So you can't see it until you look back on it. So it's like, make sure that you know how to have balance and fun is one of the major things that I say to people. And there's my seven speaking. All right. Sevens are all about having fun in life, but it's also see if you can learn about your type. And because what you're describing, success oriented people, there's a great deal of women out there who are threes, and threes are hell bent on achieving. And they think that what they achieve is who they are rather than what their essence is. And as I get closer to the point of dying, I stop and say, what do I want to be remembered for? And it's certainly not my achievements. You know, I want people at my funeral to say, I'm gathered here today because I felt loved in her presence. Boy, that's challenge I can live with, and I have to live with that every day rather than how much money did I make? What did I achieve? So I think that to just set those priorities and at the ages that you're talking about are the perfect time to do that and to stop and say, what's really important? And forget what everybody else thinks. I think that's one of the gifts of maturing. You stop worrying about what everybody else says you're supposed to be doing and you start really living more and more from your own inner knowing. So I just encourage people, learn as much as you can about it and just relax into it as it's a process.
Yeah. And I think the more we learn about ourselves, like you said, you can journal. There are ways that you can take an Enneagram test, but I liked how you said in your trainings and when we spoke before the interview that, you should really read and research first before you take a test. Because I've taken it twice and I'm one of those people I overanalyze and I'm doing all these different things trying to figure out what the best answer is. So I thought I was a one.
Okay.
So I haven't taken the test again. It's been a while, but I'll take it again after doing all this research with your work.
I was just going to say, put off the test. Most of them are very accurate, but they're mostly accurate. And some of the leading Enneagram teachers say that they had the wrong type for years. So the inner compass is exactly the kind of thing that can be helpful to you.
And technically, I thought I was a one, but my husband, we watched a couple of videos today. My husband was like, "You're totally a three." And I'm like, "I don't know." So it's interesting. We kind of, maybe if other people are seeing us a certain way.
It could be one of the arrows. And so it takes a while. And I often say to people, one of the reasons that not many people get very involved in the Enneagram is because it's more complex. It's not the easiest thing. I don't fit the normal seven pattern. It talks about being flighty, jumping from one thing to another. Party is the last I've never been, drinking party kind of person, but then I studied I don't know if you've ever heard the name Cynthia Bourgeault. She's a very powerful spiritual teacher, and she's a 7, and she said she recognizes the difference. A 7 are longing for every possibility and just try to connect everything, and that's where I fit. I see that, and I do think, I don't know that I'm the healthiest 7 yet, but, I'm no longer just jumping from one thing to another, although I have to say it's very hard for me to just stay with one thing. I can be in the reading one email and jump to another, and I know that's my 7. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's annoying because 'cause I'm not disciplined enough. I can't stick with one thing, and so That's my ego, and I allow it to be. But the good part of it is I see possibility, and I can be with you and see your possibility. I can see vision for something that's grander. And, I see myself serving every Enneagram 6 all over the world and anybody who points to it. So if you're a 3 or a 9, you belong too. So that's a gift. And the enthusiasm that I know I come with in life is it I focus on those things and then recognize when I'm refusing to look at pain to stop and say, okay, take a look. What are you really feeling here? Give yourself some time to grieve. And I'm doing more and more of that. Even sometimes I have to watch a sad movie to make myself cry. But I know that sounds weird, but I've learned what works.
Hmm. Well, and I think it is that self awareness of just understanding who you are and seeing the patterns and then working on whatever areas you need to work on to grow.
I'm gonna keep changing that, not work on it, just observe it. Just be with it. And, because it's not like something's wrong, I gotta fix it. Working on it has that mentality. I used to call it homework all the time. It's like, no, we don't need to work, but just observing and it's like, what is the motivation is the key to knowing your Enneagram type. What is your motivation? So look, I know that I've given a very good start to help people understand not only the type, but also the ramification of the Enneagram, that it's so much bigger than just finding your number. Many people will say, oh, yeah, I did the Enneagram. I don't remember my type. Well, no, you never did the Enneagram then.
Is there anything that you want to make sure listeners hear?
I often, when I've been doing a lot of podcasts and everybody asks that question, and I keep coming back to that because to me, that's the core issue is to say, I'm starting to recognize whether you do it through some of the journaling techniques, whether you do it through some of the shadow work. I have something else called Fear to Faith, is why I love my program because I have 6 different programs I take people through to learn some of this. And every one of them is teaching us that life is for us and life is, giving us what we need. And if we just learned that, we would be at so much more peace because we're constantly fighting what is. And I'm going to go back to where I started. Do the 7-minute practice every day. It changes you. It really does. It gets you much more conscious of using all 3 centers. And that's what can make you whole.
It brings it all back to where we started with that go slow to go fast reminder of doing the 7 minutes a day, which is great. Okay. Well, Dr. Tony, thank you for being here with us today. I'm so excited to have had this time with you. And I'll make sure all your links are in the show notes so everybody can learn about the work you do in the world. Any final thought?
I just encourage people to just keep learning, keep growing. It's really a wonderful opportunity. Thanks so much, Kendra.
Well, that's it for today's show. And I hope that you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I think Dr. Tony is just a profound speaker and thought leader. It's just a great reminder that we can be a lifelong learner. It might not always make sense, our life path, until we take the time to really sit down and reflect on where we've been, what we've learned, all the different things that have happened to us in life. Have we really laid out and reflected on how far we've come and what our life lessons have been so far to really truly understand our purpose? It's just a powerful reminder that there's actually a connection if we look closely. And so Dr. Tony's journey invites us to gently examine the invisible vows that we may have taken to expectations, achievement, that hustle culture for approval, and ask whether they still serve who we are becoming. Reclaiming your inner authority doesn't require rebellion, it requires awareness, courage, and willingness to listen to that inner voice. If this episode resonated with you, I hope that you share it with someone out there that you know who's ready to learn how to trust their own inner compass. And just take a moment today to pause and ask yourself, where might my voice be ready to grow stronger? Until next time, make sure that you take time to listen deeply and trust that your inner guidance is wiser than you think. And remember, the light in me honors the light in you. And as you head into the rest of your week, let your light shine through. Go slow to go fast, and thanks for listening.